Righto, we'll roll into it, and just so you guys can hear me as well, and the crowd. I'd just like to, we'll kick off today, and we'll bring Ray up to come give us a welcome and say a few words. So we better give him a big round of applause, shall we? Welcome, Ray.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to Wellington. My name is Ray Peckham, and I'm a proud Wiradjuri man who I have the amazing opportunity to grow up 9 kilometres outside of Wellington along the Macquarie River called Nanama Reserve until I was 18 years of age. And it's one of the oldest Aboriginal reserves in Australia, it is. So I'd like to warmly welcome you all here today onto the land of my ancestors and the Wiradjuri Nation people. For countless generations, our people have lived with the changing seasons, learning to adapt to the droughts, to the floods, and to the time of plenty. Our country teaches us resourcefulness and the importance of looking after each other and enhance times. This Drought Preparedness Roadshow is about sharing knowledge to strengthen communities, understanding drought trends, building economics, strengthen communities, already said that, building economic resilience, diversity, and our ways of working and caring for our mental health and well-being. These are not the new ideas for Aboriginal people. There are values our older people carried and passed down and thrived on this land. As you come together today, I encourage you all to listen and to learn and share, that together we can build stronger, sustainable future for our families, our community, and the country. As I pay my respect to my elders, past and present, I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us here today, and also non-Aboriginal people too. So welcome everyone, and I really hope you have a great day. So thank you.
Beautiful. Good on you, Ray. Thank you, mate. And I'd also, Josh Black, the Mayor of Dubbo Regional Council, I'd like to invite him up to say a couple of words as well.
Thank you very much. Look, this Drought Preparedness Roadshow is really, really important from a farming business perspective. We know that droughts getting longer, they're getting more frequent and deeper. So the best time to prepare is not when you're in the middle of a drought, it's in a time like this. And people say that in a drought, every day is a day closer to it raining, but the inverse is also true. So when you're in a time of good rain, you're also getting closer to the next drought. So really do need to prepare our businesses. I bought a place in Dubbo on Dubbo Road, and I bought it and it didn't rain for 3 years, and had a few good years now, but so I know all about that, and it's good to be prepared. Thank you very much to the panellists for giving up your time and coming along, and it'll be fantastic to watch on the podcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh. Cheers. Well, we're very lucky to have 5 of you. I need to get my numbers right. 5, if I can count. The 5 of you here this morning. And I think looking at the different businesses and areas that each of you represent is going to be a fascinating chat for the next hour or so. So joining me, and we've got right next to me, Associate Professor Anthony Keem. He's a hydroclimatologist. So you're going to have to explain this to me, because I reckon, maybe I'm just going to do that. Anthony, we hop in a lift, we go into the 20th floor, so we've got a little bit of time, but not heaps. Can you explain to me what it is you do?
Sure. So hydroclimatology is a combination of hydrology and climatology. So hydrology is about the water in the rivers and the lakes and whatnot, and climatology is what causes the rain and where the rain goes and so on. So hydroclimatology is a mix of those two things. So the reason why we combine the two together is because if you go and talk to a climatologist, pretty much what they care about is the atmosphere and the rain, but then after the rain hits the ground, that's the end of their job. Hydrologists are the other bit. They deal with what happens to the rain after it hits the ground, but can't really tell you too much about what's causing it. So mixing the two together, that's a field that's emerged. Probably, I've been doing it for 20 years now, but there's more and more hydroclimatologists coming. So when I first started, I went around saying I'm in the top 3 hydroclimatologists in Australia, because there was 3 of us. 2 of them were my supervisors. Now there's you see lots of them. And so it is an emerging field because people have recognised the need. It's not just about rainfall. You need to know what happens after the rain hits the ground. And climatologists can tell you about the rain, but not much about what happens after it hits the ground. So It's a mix of both.
Fascinating. And you're the best one in the room here today and probably in the Central West, so we'll keep running with that.
Equal best.
Next to you is Harry Brennan. He's the manager of Dubbo Regional Livestock Markets. He grew up in Warren, so has known the Central West incredibly well. Harry, we're in the coffee line, mate. Explain to me a little bit about what a week looks like in your life and what's keeping you busy right now.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I suppose the big ones for me are sheep sale days on Mondays. Tuesday is tidying up after the sheep sale days. Wednesday, the cattle start coming in for sale, for Thursday's sale. And then Friday, depending on which day of the month it is, it can be a store sale for cattle or tidying up after Thursday's cattle sale. But I suppose the big projects that we're working on at the minute are a master plan for the whole facility. So once it was kept in-house by council, we need to work on our asset renewal at the facility and what that means for us moving forward over the next 10 to 15 years. So that's really what we're working on at the minute, along with some big work that we're doing with the MLA and Sale Yards Australia, I suppose, to work on animal welfare across the board as well. So they're our big projects at the minute.
Beautiful. Well, working on things that are going to have generational impact and such an important part of the community as well in the sale yards, which I'm sure we'll hear more of. Jill Kelly, I'm not going to let you introduce yourself. Unfortunately, I'm going to ask you a different question. Maybe fortunately. You're a vet and livestock nutritionist, and I think yesterday we had the chance to sit on the panel, and your work and your insights are really quite unique in terms of you've got your WhatsApp group with more than a couple of hundred producers right across Australia, and you're bringing together these insights of people who are preparing for drought, some people who are in the middle of it, who are recovering. So really interesting that you get to have every single day. Where are we now? I'm running out of ideas. Okay, we're going through the drive-through, Jill. What were your key takeaways or some of the moments that came out of yesterday's conversation or something that you've been ruminating on? It's a pretty good pun as well.
I think it's funny when you put together a panel of 5 people, often there's common themes, even though that wasn't designed that way or thought up or cooked up to be that way. I couldn't believe all of those people who come from a slightly different aspect towards agriculture yesterday all were saying just about the importance of planning for drought. And so whether that is from a banking point of view and like partitioning money away for those dry times, or whether it's like me and, you know, ensuring you've got enough feed troughing for your animals, you know, it all comes back to planning in the good times for the bad times. And the other big thing was using your networks and watching what other people are doing and peer-to-peer learning and talking to other people in the industry. So keeping your connections, which is, you know, that tied into the mental health thing, like it all just threaded together perfectly. It was really great.
It is, and I feel like that peer-to-peer learning piece, if we're to pick, I don't want to be a futurist here, but I think it's something that's gaining momentum. It's what happens, I guess, in conversations at the pub or at cafes or when you're sitting next to someone in a ute. But it feels like potentially this peer-to-peer learning, there's a real opportunity to make it more deliberate, to get people together with intent to learn off each other. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the key things that our business tries to do is build communities and, you know, enhance our client base and get people together. And I can give you the science of feeding, but as for how to actually make your auger work or how to get that from there to there is like very much a farmer, you know, inventive kind of thing often, especially in drought. We all do our best and, you know, get quite inventive and agricultural. So there's a lot of gold in that, but times have changed. Like we don't all go to the pub at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon like maybe we did 20 or 30 years ago. So our communities are more and more fractured. So I think there's got to be key people within these villages that do draw those people together in an intensive way.
And you are one of them, so thank you for joining us today. Thanks. Fiona Aviat, 5th generation farmer and founder of Outback Lamb. I knew about you before I had the chance to meet you, and I think fascinating to see where your business has come from, why you ultimately look to going down this more value-added area, but also too, this journey doesn't stop. So Fiona, can you just explain a little bit about maybe Outback Lamb and what it is that you guys do in your farming operation? And food business, I think, is the other part.
Yeah, we seem to be covering a lot of bases, I think. Yeah, we started Outback Lamb in 2019. And it was probably at a time that we were looking at succession planning in our family business and sort of wondering, my husband had come through a pretty successful succession operation and their family property had been split into three, divided up between the two boys and the sister got off-farm assets. And we were kind of, having 4 children myself, we were wondering, like, is that really, as successful as that was, is that the model that we want to do? Because do you just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and buying out your neighbours? Like, where does it end? And to stay viable and to have enough land for everyone. And we thought that, really what we wanted to do was try to make more of what we had, and the logical process for that was to try to increase value vertically rather than horizontally.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking, like, you've written the word, like, as we expand, we want to get more land, L-A-N-D, and you've kind of come in and gone, nah, let's just cross out a couple of letters and change a couple and let's go more with what we've already got.
Exactly. And that then led into, I've recently completed a Nuffield scholarship on value adding in lamb, in sheep, and it's certainly... What we did was build our own brand and tried to capture value that way. It's been an enormous learning curve because I am genuinely, like, boots on the ground farmer and doing all the social media and learning about food production and the requirements around that and establishing markets and trying to flog initially lamb. We started with boxed lamb, then moved really quickly we tried to scale a little bit more, and we're doing carcasses into premium markets in Sydney. And then I was lucky enough to be part of a program called Farmers to Founders, and we'd done for actually the Dubbo Shire Council an event that they did where they wanted to have local produce there, and it's hard to sell, there's only a few lamb cutlets per sheep to do a barbecue or something at a public event, so we were like, let's just mince up a lamb and do lamb sausage rolls, and they went over really well at this beer festival that Dubbo Shire Council put on. And so from there we did this Farmers to Founders program and really focused on doing the value add to not just branding ourselves but producing food.
Yeah, lovely. How good. We're going to have a fascinating conversation. And our final one is obviously Tony, mate to 6th generation farmer from this area. And you've gone through a really interesting transition over the last few years to not just having merino sheep, but also being part of a solar farm as well. So can you just give us a little bit of context and maybe kicking it off with you, obviously to introduce yourself, but what does your operation look like today and how different is it to what it has been over, say, the last 5 or so generations?
Very different, I guess, but thank you very much for asking me to be here today. I guess I left school, my brother and I and 2 sisters were on the family farm. It certainly wasn't big enough for all of us. So I went shearing for 15 years, and in that time I bought a little block of dirt and we sold it. I got married. My wife and I got married when we were 21. Sold it, bought a bigger block, sold it, bought a bigger block, sold it, bought a bigger block, used it to buy other blocks. So it sort of progressed through that process the whole way through, doing whatever was required to survive. So I was happy to keep shearing while ever my shearing wages would cover our interest bill. And then once you take on a certain amount of debt, that wasn't happening, so we had to look for other things. So we ventured into contract farming. We did a bit of contract haymaking. That was to service our own gear, to have our own gear that was good, but to also justify having it and to pay some bills. And that went right through with truck driving, the lot, to do the whole lot. And then the opportunity came up. The property next to us was sold and developed into a solar farm. The opportunity came up for us to run a few sheep under the solar panels. We saw the benefits of it, so we signed up as well, and our place has since been sold and is now fully developed as a solar farm. We're running about 5,000 sheep under the panels at the moment. That'll go up to 7 over the summer months. And we've got a commercial farm about 50 k's out the road where we run our stud flock and our commercial flock. That's basically it.
In a nutshell. I'm glad, as you said, as long as your shearing could cover the interest bill, I was waiting for you to go, I started to shear less. So it was actually that you were expanding and growing. So that's a great outcome. It's good to see you off the shears. Anthony, I want to start with you just from a contextual, I guess, setup. Climate variance, I'd say you talk to any farmer and people are saying it definitely feels more unpredictable in terms of the information we can get. It seems more challenging. What are we noticing? If we look back over, say, the last 15 or 20 years, what does that look like historically? But when it comes to climate variability, what are we looking, if we can forecast into the future? Is is there patterns emerging, or is this just volatility at an extreme?
The pattern's emerging, that the variability is always there, right? And everyone here knows that. But and the other thing I'd say is, looking back over the last 15, 20 years, there's been some serious droughts, the Millennium Drought and the 2017-18 drought. But if you want to get a proper handle on, or the fuller picture about what drought looks like in Australia and elsewhere, you actually need to go a lot longer back than 15 or 20 years, and even longer than, we've got 100 years of instrumental data observed record here in Australia, which is great. A lot of other countries don't have that. But even going back 100 years, you see things like the World War II drought and the Federation drought, which again were serious droughts. But in the last 10 years, the new information has been coming out from what's called the paleoclimate record. So I'll explain that a bit. The paleoclimate, that's information that you can get from things like dendrochronology, like tree rings, or ice cores, or sediment. And it's not observed data, but you can see these patterns in those sources of information. And that information is available at an annual scale going back 2,000 years now. And when you look at that, it's again not the complete story, but it's a fuller story than what you get from the last 100 years, and it's definitely a much clearer picture than the last 15 years. And the overwhelming consistent message, it doesn't matter which type of paleo information you look at, but every single thing that you look at says that the last 100 years, where we've actually got data for, we've never had 100 years like that previously. And so the forecast is that, and forget about climate change, right? Well, don't forget about it, but this has nothing to do with climate change. Even if we didn't have climate change, what that paleo record says is that it's very unlikely that the next 50 or 100 years will be like the last 50 or 100 years. So you've got to be careful when you look back at the historical record and say, oh, we've seen those patterns in the past, therefore those patterns will happen again in the next 50 or 100 years. What it is that 100 years where we've got data for is just one example of how things could eventuate. The paleo record gives you a lot more examples of a greater number of droughts. And so as you start to put together those greater number of droughts, so instead of the historical record where you've got maybe, 5 to 10 serious droughts in the last 100 years, if you look at that paleoclimate record, you've got 100. 100 examples of droughts that have happened and could happen again tomorrow, irrespective of climate change. And then the thing that complicates the drought forecasting, we've got a lot of tools there that are really, really good, but they're tested and verified on that last 50 to 100 years where we've got data. The problem is when you whack climate change into the system, things change. And so the reliability of your forecasts decreases because of the impact of climate change. And so that's why you see a lot of uncertainty with those forecasts. And that's why you see that, beyond about 2-3 months in advance, the rainfall forecast is unreliable in some places. So, the Holy Grail is we wish we could say, here's a forecast for the next 5 to 10 years and this is what's going to happen with drought. But that's never going to happen. The best we've got at the moment is 3 to 6 months in advance. And in terms of forecast, but in terms of information, there's actually 1,000 or 2,000 years of examples of drought that could and are being used to inform drought risk management strategies. And that's commonly used in the urban water resource management sector, and it's starting to get used in the agriculture sector, but it's an emerging field, and so that's one of the things I like, this comment about the peer-to-peer learning, and that information's been in scientific field for 10 years, but it's not really out on the ground yet. A lot of people know about it, but there's still challenges about how do you actually take that from theoretical space and make use of it on the ground. That's one of the reasons I'm here today. I don't know the answer because I don't work on the ground. I think that information could be useful. I'm not quite sure exactly how, so I need to talk to some practitioners about that.
So just on that, so if you were to say there's one thing that you're curious about today or that you'd love to ask people, what is the one thing that you're quite curious about to sound test off the farmers and other agribusiness people in the room?
Yeah, so I want to understand a bit more about how the drought planning happens and what levers or what options you have to deal with the drought. So if a drought starts and you're 1 year into a drought, what are your options? If a drought continues for 5 years, what are your options? If a drought continues for 10 years, what are your options? Some of these droughts in the paleo record go for 20 or 30 years. And so as you progress through those steps, what are the options? Are there any options? I'm just trying to, because in order to increase drought resilience, you need to have a plan. But when you're developing that plan, you need to sort of make sure it's robust under the range of things that are plausible, right? If you just have a plan that deals with the worst drought on record, well, what happens if a drought happens that's worse than the worst drought on record? And so there's this message that there's multiple plausible scenarios that are all equally likely. How can you make a decision that's robust, or that's not a terrible result, irrespective of what happens in the future? So it's this sort of stress testing and resilience thinking and the types of things you do, not just to get through the next year, but what if the drought continues for 3 or 5 or 10 years? So that's those sort of questions. That's what I'm asking, because I don't know what the answers are.
Well, luckily we've got them here, so we're going to solve that question for you today. And the first person I'm going to throw to... Now, Jill, I think just grabbing onto that, if we try and grab a little golden thread here, if we talk to just around some of that planning and some of the insights, hearing what Anthony's just said, pretty confronting in terms of the potential realities of what could happen. Just to give a bit of insight into how do you approach this planning? Let's just go through the couple of phases. So pre-drought, but then actually when they're in the thick of it and in that uncertain patch that you just don't know when it will end, and the only thing that can solve it really is rain. How do you work with your clients through that?
So I deliberately left a more of a traditional veterinary role, which was quite reactive, and now we work proactively with producers. So I want them to run the best agricultural business they can with the most productive, profitable livestock that they can in every season. And that inadvertently slips a bit of drought planning into the system, because droughts you don't wake up one day and go, oh, we're in a drought. Droughts creep, okay? And so it might be 6 months before you wake up and go, I think we're in a drought. But it actually started 6 months prior. And so we don't talk about drought, we talk about feed gaps. And there are feed gaps naturally in our system all the time. Most commonly is the terrible autumn feed gap that affects most southern production systems. But I've got clients in Queensland, like winter is a real feed gap for them. And I classify a feed gap as any time where the pasture or the nutrition that we're supplying naturally out of the paddock doesn't meet the needs of the livestock. So they're either not putting enough weight, animals are losing weight, etc., etc. So that's a feed gap, and we manage them in a proactive, cost-effective way to achieve really good production. Now, in our variable climate, that often involves supplementary feeding. It might involve, pasture improvement, fertilisation, who knows. But invariably, because of our variable climates, most of my clients will have a confinement feeding area or some ability to supplementary feed animals with grain on their farms. And that's part of our drought resilience strategy. So that's drought planning. We've got enough troughing, we've got some commodities, we've got the ability to move grain. And if we run a really productive, profitable business, hopefully that gives us enough fat in the system in terms of cash flow to tuck a bit away and provision some funds for when it does get really dry. But I think what Anthony was saying is really important, because the challenge of drought is we are making decisions, really important decisions, under an incredibly large mental stress burden, but we're also being asked to make decisions without all of the information, because we can't forecast what's going to happen or when it might rain. Droughts would be easy if you knew the end point, but we never do. And so, but there's an art in that, and it's something we can practice, and it's something that we get really, really good at. And I find, because of the variability of our climate, most of the businesses that I work in are making tactical decisions about their stocking rates or their livestock production all the time in the good times. So they've got a pretty well-developed decision-making muscle when it all turns dry.
That's a great example. Fiona, I want to pick your brain. So based on what Anthony has said, in terms of just the variability, if we look at it, Australia's one context, you've had the chance to travel the world, and although you were looking at the value-added opportunities, what were some of the observations that you picked up and saw that businesses were doing to build resilience into just their day-to-day?
Our real takeaway from the 14 weeks of international travel that we did as a group was they're global problems but local solutions, and it's really specific to your own environment and your own business, but the issues are so universal across the world in terms of farmers aren't just, what are we trying to protect ourselves from in drought preparedness? We want to look after our animal welfare. We want to shore up our business so it's, still there and viable. But we also have that overarching responsibility towards the land and the environment that we are caretakers of. So Jill touched on it, like that. The pressure is immense because it's not a perfect world, and you can't win at everything. So there's compromise all the way through, and sometimes that's really quite ugly. It's certainly in terms of looking at it from an international perspective, Australia is probably more diverse than a lot of the countries that we went to because there's so many, we've got dry land systems, we've got irrigation, we've got tropical, we've got, there's a whole host of systems within our environment, and that's why I think within Australia it's so important to have a system on your own property that matches your environment really well. And what running a farm and sheep in particular as a business does is that it makes, you're always looking for productivity, but increases in productivity create additional burdens on your system, because if you're pushing lambing percentages and if you're pushing feed conversion and all that kind of stuff, when you do go into a drought, it makes you a lot more vulnerable, and our systems are increasingly set up for these high productivity solutions. And I think that if people want to prioritise environment and the trade-offs that go with that, then we really need to revisit what farmers are getting paid for and how that evens out, because the more we focus on productivity, the quicker we can slip into drought.
Tony, for you, one of the ways that I presume you're combating this and building a more resilient business has been that shift to going, okay, well, let's do, instead of one enterprise, let's look at renewables and sheep, for instance. Can you just talk us through the decision-making around that and what you've learned since over the last couple of years?
Well, it's interesting listening to Anthony that not all droughts, obviously we know they're not the same, but some can be prolonged. Because in 2015, my wife and I decided that the best way to help drought-proof our place is we should look at a little irrigation place to service our own needs, which we did. So we bought a little irrigation block in town. It was all on drip tape, fully automated. We had a really reliable contractor to do our work. It was a really good setup. But then when we got into the drought, 2 years further into the drought than we ever thought anyone was ever going to be, bore dried up, the river dried up, so we had no water, so we were paying interest on an irrigation block at the same time as buying hay. So that sort of backfired a little bit. So, you do have to adapt. You have to learn to roll with it. So the opportunity next door was a no-brainer for us to secure things.
One thing that I'm thinking of as, I guess, each of you are talking, I think there's the piece, Anthony, that you mentioned around, droughts aren't the same. Like, I just think of, if we think of move ourselves as far away from here as we probably can and get by the ocean. You think you can go to the same beach. Let's choose Bondi because that's a beach we love to pick on in ag. But choose Bondi Beach. You can go there on a Monday and it can be flat as a tack, look like a lake. You come and there might be a few surfers out. You come on the Tuesday and maybe the waves have started to pick up. By the Friday, potentially, the beach can be completely unrecognisable to what it was at the beginning of the week with whitewash and waves. And I guess that's the fluctuation that can happen in the same system or what looks like the same piece. There's an analogy which I love that Ben Crow uses, which is you just need to learn how to surf. So it's very easy, Jill, to your point, learning how to surf on those days where the waves are small, get the technique and whatnot. And then one day you might actually be able to go and surf the biggest waves in the world, the most challenging conditions that people thought would have been completely unrecognisable to it. That's probably does that analogy stick with you guys? Does anything come to mind when I say that?
It definitely sticks with me because it's actually the main reason I got into this game, this understanding climate variability. So I actually lived in Wellington until I was 12 years old, and then never went to the beach except on holidays. And when I went to Newcastle, of course, I wanted to surf, and one of my mates went and said he'd teach me how to surf, and the first thing he said was, you got to just go out every single day, no matter what the conditions are like, because the only way you're going to be able to surf is if you can go out and handle whatever the beach throws up at you, because it's never going to be the same. And so that was a really good lesson for me. And it took me years, but now I'm sort of semi-competent. For someone growing up in the country, it was pretty hard to do. But then the other thing is that analogy about the beach, it's different every single day. What got me into this was why. What causes it to be different? And those differences are caused by the weather, and that weather is controlled by these overarching climate systems. And in Australia, those climate systems are happening at all sorts of scales. You know, sub-daily scale, daily, weekly, monthly, seasonal, yearly, these multi-year droughts, multi-decadal, and it's happening differently in different places. So that's a challenge and an opportunity in Australia, because the droughts happen, but going back in those 1,000, 2,000 years of record, it's very rare that it happened, I think it's twice in a couple of thousand years, that the whole of Australia has been in drought at the same time. And so there is, you know, in terms of diversification and things like that, and at a smaller scale. So we did some work with Tracy, who's here today, and up in the Castlereagh, and even in that last drought, the sort of northwest of that Castlereagh region was heavily in drought, but the southern area, not so bad. And so even down to that regional level, there is opportunities there that not everybody's suffering the drought the same at the same time. I'd also just want to stop focusing so much on the negatives and what you mentioned before about the importance of planning to make advantage of the good times. In that 1,000-year record, what's also very, very clear is there's decades there of great opportunity. And so it's not just about doing whatever we can do to survive the drought. It's about, and this is another thing you asked what I wanted to learn out of this, is what are some things we can do better to take more advantage of those good times when they come, because they will come and they do persist for years, sometimes decades. But you just don't want to fall into the trap that you mentioned about thinking they'll last forever, because that's the one thing I can guarantee today. The drought won't last forever, but neither will the good times.
And is that something, Jill, for you, like that mindset with your clients of going, okay, this is where we are now, but when we get the chance, let's put our foot on the gas and go hard?
Oh, absolutely. I've got a relatively new client over at Manila, north of Tamworth, and he used to be quite high up in Woolworths. He's an operations manager for Woolworths. And he's come home to his wife's family place and doesn't know a lot about running sheep, but he's doing a great job because he's just applied the operational principles of running supermarket chains to running a farm. And he'll ring me for advice and we'll talk things over. And one of the things he said to me once was, absolutely not, we're not doing that, Jill. Complexity creates waste. So the more complex your system and the more involved it is and the more you sweat the small stuff, the more wasteful that system becomes. And I just think, yeah, that's part of what I do in terms of drought preparedness, even though my farmers probably don't know that it's happening. We are just running the best system we can that suits the environment in the good years, and we run it really efficiently and in a really refined manner so that when the drought comes, we've got a really embedded, well-driven system that then we can bend and flex. I think Jack Brennan says, you've got to tighten your belt and lace up your running shoes at the same time when it gets dry.
Harry, you mentioned at the beginning around you guys at the sale yards are working through a master plan. So why is that significant? But let's grab the positive. What's the opportunity here for the Dubbo region and the Central West more broadly through that master plan?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So I suppose I might just go back to the beach first. The fluctuations. So the market is never the same on any given day, and it varies. Monday sheep sale, by the time it gets to Wagga on Thursday, huge fluctuation. So what does that mean for the master plan, I suppose? Like during the last major drought for the Western region, it was the sheer number of animals coming through the livestock markets. So I think we had something like nearly 400,000 cattle and 2.5 million sheep. So it's a great clearinghouse, but we need to make sure that our facilities can cater to that and put a floor in the market so that vendors, producers are receiving good value for money. And for us, it's making sure our facility remains compliant. And a big part of that now is the fit to load from MLA and things like that, where if there are drought-stricken animals coming in, we need to provide really, really good facilities, and the transparency of the meat industry is super important as well, and being able to be part of that, because it really starts at farm gate, and we're just a piece of the puzzle through that. And I mean, in those bad times, producers need to be able to still get their money to keep them going. And then if you want to flip that and say in the good times, I think producers are getting really, really good at capitalising on the good times. They're more educated when it comes to making good decisions around whether it be sheep, cattle, goats, whatever. Like, I'm just talking livestock here, but even to the point where I think a lot of people talk about growing kilos of beef. So they know when it's time to sell, and they're getting the absolute best bang for their buck. And they're getting good guidance, again, from people like Gillian and others out there in the community.
Tony, I want to pick on you again. Just, if you can treat me like I know nothing, which is pretty easy, just explain how your system now is benefiting your business, and how does it actually work, and what benefit is it giving you at the end of the day, if we look at your business from a profitability lens, but also sustainability as well?
Well, I suppose probably one person that we're missing from a panel like this is a banker. They're critical in your relationship with the drought and any other time. And right through our period with farming, the closest relationship that we've ever had is with our bank manager. Whether we like them or whether we don't, that's the bloke you need to talk to. So what we've found since we sold to the solar farm, we don't have him anymore. So we've still got a bank manager, but he serves a different purpose. So it's just taken the pressure right off. So my wife and I've got 3 daughters. None of them are interested in farming. They never have been. They're all very, very happy doing their own careers. So what was our long-term plan? The solar farm knocked on the door. What's your options? If I say no, they go to my neighbour. He says yes. So we said yes, we'll entertain it. The other option is we sit there for 20 years and then we sell it at market value, and we ride in the ups and the downs. So there's an opportunity there for us to go. So we took that opportunity to set ourselves up. Certainly our 3 daughters aren't complaining about it all.
And has it taken a weight off you as well? Just, I know decision making we touched on a lot yesterday, but just in terms of the ability for you to make decisions, has it made it easier knowing, I guess, where that destiny lies?
Oh, certainly it does, yes. Yeah, it's definitely there's a lot of pressure off. 12 months ago, I had a huge health scare about this time. I was told I only had a fortnight to live, a cancer battle, and fortunately everything's good and we're in the clear and we're heading in the right direction. Had that have happened with us and we hadn't have sold, when you're the managing director, the CEO, and you're responsible for everything that happens on the farm, and you're running between farms and you're running around, everything's good while you're healthy. But if that had happened when we were at our financial highest burden, yeah, it would have been catastrophic, really. Like, at no point were we concerned about our debt level. It was always serviceable, but it was always something that was on your mind. It was something you had to be very conscious of. Your preparedness for droughts, your strategy, you always had to be a long way in front, because you knew when payments were due, you knew what had to roll, you knew things had to tick over the whole time. So the whole time your brain was ticking over that way. And I guess it's relieved that pressure a lot. But I mean, I still see it in all my neighbours and my friends. It's the same process.
Given that you don't have the chance to go back into the past, but for young people in ag now who potentially are running around like I feel like I'm talking to myself, who are running around, working yourself to the bone, trying to, I guess, get ahead. But knowing that, what would be your advice to people around, let's call it key person risk in the business? Yeah, from what you know right now, through getting an unexpected diagnosis like that, what would you tell younger people to start to maybe think about in their businesses?
Well, certainly life insurance and trauma insurance was well and truly covered. Fortunately, our bank manager insisted that once you get to a certain debt level, they need to know that things are covered if something goes wrong. So fortunately that was there, but that still doesn't change the fact that the person that goes and feeds the sheep every day all of a sudden is not going to be there. There needs to be, you just need to be conscious of that in your decisions. Yeah, but go for it. Yeah, whatever opportunities are there, and do whatever you need to do to survive. It'll be worth it in the long run.
Lovely. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Tony. I'm glad you're here. Fiona, can you just explain to us, so at the beginning you talked to us around it was either buy more land or how do we do more with what we've got. Just some of those learnings you've had going through vertical integration, but also where we find you today. And I guess that never-ending journey of you don't just decide to be vertically integrated one day and then it's happy in your home.
Yeah, I guess the challenge very much was, and touching on what the other guys have said, is that getting that balance right. And we certainly wanted to, I guess our focus was taking the fluctuations or the big lows out of our system and how could we do that. And whether you're doing solar panels, and enterprise stacking or running wool sheep, meat sheep, doing cropping, what you're trying to do is create a levelness in your income. And very rarely are if you've got 3 enterprises, which seems to be complex enough, very rarely are all 3 paying their way at the same time. But if you're lucky, you've got 2, and in the bad seasons, you've got 1. And so that's how we've addressed that on our family place. It's my sister and I are farming. Our dad's still on the land. He's in his 80s, and we'll go through do our generational succession at some stage. But my sister Fliss and I always laugh that the dad only comes good in a drought because he knows, like, it being that age, they just know that they've got to pin their ears back, look ahead, get out every day, feed the sheep. Like, he almost enjoys the regularity, the knowledge, and quite comfortable in the knowledge that it'll end because he's seen them all end. But, each time a worse drought is thrown up, it's challenging. But certainly for my sister and I being the next generation, that was the hardest thing for us in that last drought, was living it and the financial pressure around, constantly being in the naughty corner with the banks. And we're always, I'm at a stage of my life where we're educating kids, we're hemorrhaging cash. We need that cash flow that we get from sheep and finishing lambs and that type of thing. And when the weather isn't conducive to it, it's increasingly challenging.
As you say that, Fiona, one about the drought, and I guess your dad's knowledge, I'm going to call it wisdom actually, that he's never seen a drought not end, because I think that's a great thing to kind of remember. My very first boss said to me, he's like, in business, he's like, good times never last that long, bad times never last that long, like something's always going to give. He said, just make sure the thing that gives is never you. So it's always, and I like, honestly, when things are good, I just come back to that, and I guess that's the internal pessimist of going, well, how do you then plan for what is to come? But then similarly, when you find yourself in the depths of going, how are we going to get out of this? What's next? You just know, like, okay, well, what decisions do I need to make to, 1, look after myself to keep showing up, but then 2, as you say, it will end at some stage. Your business right now, so can you talk to us a little bit about some of those opportunities ahead? So outside the farm gate, just ways you are diversifying and I guess inching forward.
Well, I certainly want to start this conversation by emphasising the fact that I knew nothing about food production when I moved very clearly into food production, apart from like growing lambs, but I didn't know about anything. Once it left the farm gate, I had some vague understandings about ABS and how they worked, but not around the rules and the regulations and how it ended up on the consumer's plate specifically. And so for us it's been an incredibly steep learning curve. And as I said, we pivoted at different times. Like, there was COVID in the middle of all of that as well from when we started. And we went from boxed lamb to full carcass and then to lamb sausage rolls. And the irony was that I wanted to move away from the type of business where you were a commodity producer, and which is why I wanted to brand ourselves and have and build that surety into our customer base that wasn't just about producing commodities. And I've learnt very quickly that food actually is a commodity, that it's very interchangeable even at the supermarket level. People will switch out one protein for another depending on price. They will look at different brands of the same product and pick things on price. And people like to think that you're well serviced with. People think they want animal food that is ethically raised, and they think they want food that is maybe grass-fed and all that kind of thing. But what they actually want is cheap food. And so if you're trying to build value into a product by your story, it's got to be a good story. And at the moment, that story is a big part of the value of our business, and we're in talks with food suppliers for airlines about doing a great volume of product into that, which is a really, sometimes airlines need a great story because they get a bit of a caning. But we definitely realised very early on in the piece that we needed quantity to step away from a slightly profitable side hustle to move into a standalone business.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you, Fiona. I want to ask each of you, and it's going to be a tailored question, but I guess similar theme. I'm going to start with you. Just for the business you're in, Dubbo's Regional Sale Yards, what's the most untapped opportunity to build economic resilience and diversification for you guys in the sale yards?
For us, it's probably two things. So one of the key ones is from our business case and master plan, we realised that you can't just can't keep increasing yard dues. It doesn't work. Eventually, there's a limit, and so we're trying to not affect the producer by tapping into other areas. So one of those is Dubbo's central location. So sheep and cattle are moving all over the country. In fact, I think you'll find 30% of all livestock truck movements go through Dubbo. So they've got to stop somewhere under animal welfare rules. What better place than Dubbo? 5 highways meet in Dubbo, so we're tapping into that. And so generally speaking, that's fee charged to the processors or the feedlots, not the actual producer, which is in some ways really important. We don't want to keep stinging the people that generate a lot of income for the facility. So that's one area that we're really harnessing now, and we're seeing some significant growth in that market, which is good for us. And the other one is actually the truck washers, and so how that works, they have to wash the backs of their trucks out. But currently we use river and bore water for that, and so we're strongly looking into at the moment, or probably we've progressed more than that, where we're to the point we realise that we need to be able to recycle that water to a Class A level, which means the truck wash water can then be used back through the truck wash, and that gives us an extra 100 megs a year to use at the facility or sell on the open market. So they're two key areas for us to generate more revenue, to improve our facility over the next few years, but without impacting the people who are sending their stock to our facility, which is really important to us. So that's pretty much it for us.
A couple of really important kind of considerations that are front of mind and not easy. Easy to identify, difficult to overcome. But what about for you? What's the biggest untapped opportunity, either in your business personally or for your clients?
Untapped opportunity. I guess from my business's point of view, starting my business was a bit daunting because most vets are just vets. They run vet clinics. They deal with sick animals. So what I decided to do was quite novel, and I didn't have a business model to follow. Thankfully, it's worked really well. But I think it's got a diversified income stream as well, which is really important. So it's built on a subscription basis. So farmers sign up for a pretty low price point. But then we also do quite a lot of farm visits and consulting work. But we also do things with governments and MLA, and there's like a considerable amount of contract work built in, research projects, things like that. We hire out Optiways. We do a lot of workshops. There's loads of different income streams, which is good, really. And drought could be one thing that does deplete, the profitability of our business. But I actually get busier in drought because we're pretty valuable in terms of the feeding of livestock. And the thing is too, now I've got such a spread of my clients, we're in drought all the time. So at the moment we're helping the Victorians with drought. But it'll probably be the Queenslanders or us next. So we never really get away from it. We do a considerable amount of drought work all the time. But for me personally too, like I've got Jan, but I also trade cattle and have a bit of a creative side hustle as well. So diversified income streams is a massive part of what I do personally as well. And I think it's important.
Absolutely. Get your mind working in different ways. Tony, if we look at, so just farmers around the area, what do you see? Like, I guess if I was to make an assumption, I'd say the partnering of renewables and farming, but what do you see as an untapped opportunity? Or if you were to look through the crystal ball, what's going to be the opportunities in the next 10 years?
Personally, for our enterprise or for the district's enterprise?
Let's go both.
Well, personally, I think the opportunities under the solar panels to improve pasture growth, to improve stocking rates, just to diversify crops, not only for stock, but for market gardens in certain areas, that type of thing, there's massive potential there. Like, it's a huge industry it's just starting completely untapped. As for the community as a large, for benefits with drought, Wellington and district is hosts of a lot of the renewables. So I probably feel that maybe there should be a bit given back to the districts that do host all the renewables to enhance their communities, to help them out.
For you, Anthony, you'd see lots of different communities, lots of different areas. What, if we were to look at it through a community lens, do you see there's an untapped opportunity for those rural communities?
Yeah, I do. So this is very much from a researcher perspective, but I don't know if you've been watching the news lately, but the uni sector's terrible at the moment, loss of international students and whatnot. So the unis are really rethinking their business model, and also the way that the government funds research. And there's a very big shift to, and this is the buzzword, co-designed research. And so rather than what's happened traditionally, whereas researchers get some funding and they go off and pursue their passion project and do some theoretical thing that hopefully one day might be useful to someone, they're tipping that on its head, and they're moving towards a more bottom-up model, where your chances for getting funding are now research funding are now a lot greater if you can demonstrate you actually have discussed it with a real-life person and you're working together on a real-life problem, and it's actually going to provide some on-the-ground benefit. And so there's massive opportunities there for communities to get involved in that. We've got students coming through, really smart people coming through all the time, looking for projects to work on. And so any sort of problems that people have in the community that you don't know the answers to, that's ideal for a research project. So there's some big opportunities there to tap into what is a significant resource, like the intellect in the young people coming through the uni system that are just looking for a project to work on. And in my experience, the projects that are the best are the ones that do have a real connection to the real world and a concrete benefit at the end of it. And that's where the funding bodies are moving to as well now. So that's a big opportunity that I'd like to see more taken advantage of. So just yesterday I was up in Muswellbrook with a contingent from the uni, working with the mining companies that are around Muswellbrook and Singleton, transitioning away from coal. And so it's a little bit similar to the agriculture sector. They've got a complete transformational change happening there. Lots and lots of questions, lots and lots of problems they do not know the answers to. And so they're coming to the university saying, hey, we've got this problem. Can you help us find a solution? And so that is what I think the universities and the research organisations should be used for. And there's a big opportunity there. There's a lot of capacity in Australia for really smart people coming through. You just need to give them a problem and work. Don't just give them a problem and get them to go away for 2 or 3 years, like work with them every step of the way. And then I think the result will be something that hopefully is beneficial for everybody rather than just ending up in a paper on a shelf somewhere.
And so is that as simple as us, like sending an email to the uni?
It's for a start, yeah. Send an email to me.
Because that seems like a bit of a problem. Like, how do we get the
contact,
ideas? Who grabs them and gets them to you?
So yeah, the individual contact is, that's the first level. So I've got a team under me, and you send me an email if you've got a problem or a question or want to know more about what we do. That's the first thing. Organisations like the regional councils, what is it, research development thing going on? That's right. Yeah, so this similar sort of thing to what we had in Muswellbrook yesterday is happening in Arana, where it's putting researchers in contact with the people that have problems that need solving. The other thing that's happening is the Future Drought Fund. So they've got the Drought Innovation and Adoption Funds. There's 8 of them, there's 8 of them around Australia. So this one would belong to the Southern New South Wales Drought Hub, I'd say. So there's networks there that you can access. But yeah, either contact someone directly if you know them, if not via those other mechanisms.
Yeah, perfect. I'm going to ask if there's any questions from anyone out here, or even, Jill, you asked a question to the panel yesterday. Does anyone have a question for anyone else on the panel, or any questions from the floor? There we go. And I'll get you a microphone.
Thank you. Tracy Stinson. I'm here to actually run the Drought Resilience Workshop this afternoon. My business is really about collaboration and bringing people together. And I just wondered, particularly thinking about the future and what Anthony's presented in terms of, you know, some of those droughts that could go on for a very long time, what opportunities do you see in terms of collaboration between farmers, between suppliers, you know, that could help to withstand some of those longer term droughts?
Jill.
I think it's massive and it's untapped. So if we rewind back to 2016 was a big wet winter. 2017 got dry. We started to feed. By early 2018, there were some pretty worried people. And I was getting loads of calls of people saying, I've run out of barley. I've gone and bought rice straw, palm kernel expeller, cottonseed. What on earth am I going to do with it? And they were really upset. And I said, come to town. I'll boil a kettle, cook a cake. We'll have drought smokos on Tuesdays. So we started getting people together. And to start with, that was me teaching people how to feed stock. But by the end of 100 of them, it was just mateship and cups of tea and farmers solving each other's problems. People still are, we're running them virtually at the moment for Victoria, but my farmers around Canamble still say, when are we having drought smokos again? Because they bloody love them. So I think any opportunity that farmers can get together in that sort of an informal setting is really valuable. But there just needs to be a spark that kicks it off and puts it together and draws them together. And it's sort of got to be done in maybe a kind of fun, less formal way to make it worth coming along. But I think, collaboration is really, really important, both for there's no textbook on drought, and the next one will be different. So my question yesterday on the panel was, last drought, livestock prices stayed really high and it was worth feeding stock. But what if that's different next time? What's the predictor on what's going to happen with livestock prices into the future? And no one knows. But we might not feed as many stock next drought. Who knows? But it'll be different. And so there's no textbook. We've got to work it out as we go to some regard. And that's why the talking to each other is so important and really necessary.
Harry?
There's a few producers here, obviously. One of the things that I've recently come across was the use of like AI, the tech kind, in making some decisions or helping play out different scenarios. So I just was wondering if people were using it for that. Like you can just put that financial data in and where you could see the season playing out and what that can show you in terms of scenario planning.
Was that you want to ask that question? Yeah. Anyone want to jump in and answer that?
I think there's massive potential, but be careful. So one of my very good clients the other day put into ChatGPT, so he wants to lock his ewes up pre-lambing in order to increase his stocking rate. He's got irrigation pivots up near Texas in Queensland. And he wants to lock his ewes up while the feed's no good and then let them out onto the irrigation pivots to lamb on the beautiful lush feed. So he, instead of ringing me and asking me to do his cost-benefit analysis, he asked ChatGPT. And it worked a treat. It spat out. And then he sent it to me and said, can you check this? And I thought, this bloody thing's going to put me out of business. But it did a really good job, surprisingly. It's definitely worth checking. But I think there's massive potential to do things like that if you can harness the technology. I'm not sure about its ability to forecast climate, but I think there's potential.
It's huge, isn't it? Yeah.
What it is really useful for, in terms of the climate space and the forecasting, there's reams and reams and reams of data out there. And AI is a very good way of efficiently processing that data and getting it into some sort of snapshot that a human can deal with. And so there is, in terms of the research space, there's a lot of work going on there about how do we use AI for good rather than just putting everybody out of a job and ending up with gibberish. There is opportunities there, but you have, with the ChatGPT and all those things, the secret is to being very targeted and specific in what you're asking it to do, and that targetedness and being specific has to come from someone that knows what's going on the ground, and otherwise you can just go off into fantasy world.
One of the things that often rears its head during a drought too is biosecurity, because we've got obviously a lot of livestock moving around more than normal. You've got feed moving around and all that kind of thing. And more recent, since the last drought, there's a lot more awareness around the risks of foot and mouth and lumpy skin disease. And when Harry was talking about the washing the trucks, with recycled water, even though like it's A level, it's got to be a huge consideration of theirs, because imagine if there was a load came in with lumpy skin disease or foot and mouth, the water was, the truck was washed out, and as you said, where the intersection in Dubbo of 5 highways, you could have an absolutely massive outbreak in a very short amount of time. Would you guys, like, obviously that's a real consideration for you?
Yes, as a travelling stock centre, like we're it when it comes to travelling stock. So biosecurity is huge on our agenda, especially when it comes to the feed that comes into the facility as well. Like it's not just water; it's a whole swag of things. So yeah, I'd say in times of drought, when feed's coming from a lot of different places, we've got some really stringent rules, like where we have to follow the NSQA, so that's National Stock Quality Assurance Program, and that's to guarantee access to the UCAS market and as well as all the other export ones. So we have a lot of rules that we have to follow, and I think in times of drought, that's our highest biosecurity risk, as you said.
I think also it's from our own experience, you're huge on biosecurity until the problem flips and the issue is not biosecurity, but it's hungry livestock. And suddenly you're like, back that truck in, boys, and dump it. You're not so worried about it because the pressures change. And I know this happened as part of our travels in the UK. There's a huge market there for organic and biodynamic produce, whether it be milk off dairies or livestock. And a lot of the feed that they source, because they don't produce their own feed in the UK, or a lot of it comes from the Ukraine. And with the war there, everything shut down, and because obviously the Ukraine's got quite good soil and they don't need a lot of fertiliser and they can meet the market. And then suddenly it became a huge welfare issue because people could not source feed for their organic livestock, and at the risk of jeopardising their entire accreditation system. So there's a huge overlay of problems that come in drought, or these black swan events where feed becomes hard to source, that farmers, again, is the burden that they bear, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
So how can producers use seasonal forecasting and climate modelling to inform diversification decisions?
Yep, so different aspects to that question. So seasonal forecasting is very much the short-term thing. Climate modelling is never going to be able to tell you what's going to happen. Right? Climate modelling is about simulating what could happen. And the thing with climate modelling is there's 60-something climate models that are used around the world and 10 or so different emission scenarios. And so the results coming out of climate modelling exercise are always going to have a range of multiple plausible scenarios. And the danger that people often do is they pick one, or they want to try to pick one. And sometimes it's the middle one because they think that's the best guess, or sometimes it's the worst case, sometimes it's the best case. But that's a mistake, and you get yourself into trouble from that, because if you just pick one climate model or one scenario from a range of climate models, almost certainly it won't eventuate. Right? That's the reason why there's a range. That range is called, there's multiple plausible scenarios, they're all equally likely. So how can you use those to diversify? You need to consider what that plausible range is. And then what I was saying before, make sure whatever decisions you make are robust and flexible enough to deal with what actually eventuates. Because what actually eventuates, hopefully will be somewhere within that range, but nobody has got any way of telling exactly what will happen. A climate model is not a crystal ball. It can't tell you what will happen in the future. It just gives you some idea about what could happen. And so it's a tool. It's a tool that can tell you what could happen, that should be used to guide you and help you make some decisions that are as robust as possible going forward. But the key is to do things like what Tony mentioned about making sure you're flexible, making sure you've got the ability to change if things don't go down the path that you're doing. And so, yeah, the short answer is use those climate models and the seasonal forecasting to a lesser degree to give you an idea of what could happen, but don't mistake that for them telling you what will happen. And so that's the thing. Seasonal forecasting is a bit similar to the climate modelling, but coming back a bit, some of those week-to-week forecasts, they can be used in an operational sense, because that's different, right? The week-to-week forecasts are weather forecasts. That's the forecast of what actually is expected to happen. And so you can sort of go and make operational decisions based on that. I'll buy some more stock, or I'll put a crop in the ground, or whatever you might want to do. But the climate model forecasting and the seasonal, like months in advance forecasting, is just used to give you some idea of the range of things that could happen to help you plan, not to tell you exactly what to do.
Can I add something to that? From the businesses that I become involved in, I reckon that if you're thinking about any sort of diversification, I mean, by all means look at the forecasting and the climate modelling and what might happen, but it sounds like all of that is not set in stone. What is set in stone is what is your current farm business performance. And I find lots of producers who do taxation from an accounting point of view to minimise tax and to get the accountant done at the end of the financial year, but they don't actually root around in those figures and actually work out how profitable they are and what's driving that. So, you know, and I say to farmers, what's your cost of production? What's your gross margin, DSE base or a per hectare base? They don't know. And it's because they haven't had a really good dig around in their farm books with an educated person to actually work that out. So before you diversify, I'd be having a look in what you're currently doing and going, what is profitable, what is not profitable, and what do we love doing, and what drives this business from what's the heart and soul of it, and then work out whether we can improve what we're doing in some regard or whether we do need to diversify in some broader way. That's where I'd start.
That's a better answer than mine, and I'd like to add to that. So the way we use climate models in the water resource management sector is not so much, here's what the model says is going to happen, therefore we're then going to go and do this. You've got your existing operation. You use the outputs from the climate models to stress test that, right? If you keep going the way you're going, what parts of that will hold up under these range of plausible scenarios? And if you find nothing does, well, then you've got to change something, right? But if you find some aspects of what you're doing are quite robust, irrespective of what scenario eventuates, that's the thing you want to do more of. And so the climate models are a tool, and the outputs from the climate models and the seasonal forecasts are just a tool. They're just models that can give you some information to stress test your existing operation, or if you're planning on changing your existing operation, what changes will hold up under these range of plausible scenarios, so therefore could be a good idea to pursue. What things sound good on paper, but when you run them through this stress testing, actually fall over pretty quickly. And so that's the way they get used in the water sector. So for example, Newcastle just recently, they went through the process of deciding whether or not to put in a desal plant. So $4 billion investment, is it a good idea or not? Tested all the plausible scenarios, and under every single one it said, yeah, that's a good idea. And it's a much better idea than building a brand new surface water storage reservoir, because majority of those future scenarios are indicating that it's going to be drier on the coast. And so that brand new surface water storage reservoir will just be a hole in the ground in 50 years. Whereas the desal plant, whether it rains or not, it's still a good asset, because the Water Authority, yeah, they're in the business of not running out of water, but they're also in the business of selling water. So even when it's not a drought, they make money by selling water. So irrespective of what happens with the climate models and whatever, that desal plant is a good idea. And so they spent the $4 billion and they're doing it, and they'll get a return on investment. So that's the sort of that's what I'm talking about when I say robust decision making under uncertainty, that sort of thing. And I'm interested to know how to take that sort of thinking and put it across to the agriculture sector. Obviously, you don't have the option of a desal plant, coastal desal. You might have some groundwater desal, but are there other options that are robust under the range of many, many plausible scenarios? Some of them are climate scenarios, some of them are economic scenarios, political scenarios, you name it. No one knows what's going on in the future, especially a climate model.
I love what Anthony's saying, and getting back to the AI, I think that there's some really key points in that we can punch in a whole heap of data, and getting back to what Jill was saying, the importance of having a plan, because what we found, like I'm probably a great example of what not to do, but what we found in the last drought was, in every 3 weeks, there was a rain event forecast like 3 weeks out, and you get into a feeding program and that kind of thing, we go, okay, we'll buy another road train full of feed, and then that'll carry us through for 6 weeks, and there's a rain event forecast, so you're budgeting and you can do that, but you're working on too short a time cycle, and because you're hoping that this forecast rain event 3 weeks out is going to happen and change everything, and also you've invested X amount to get to this point, so you don't want to waste all that money by selling off or jeopardising everything. But the importance of having a really robust plan with a lot of options, and AI could really give you like some really clear dates and feed levels and all that kind of stuff to be firm in your own mind. This is the best decision. I've got to this date. It doesn't matter what the forecast is. This is what we're doing. And I think that's where a lot of opportunities open up.
Just one quick one. It's options with triggers. Right, so again, that desal example, they didn't go full scale straight away. They've gone with a small scale at first, which is $1 billion, but they've got the approval to go large scale if and when they meet a certain trigger. So there's flexibility in there without, throwing away the bank straight away.
Just because I'm conscious that we are going to have to wrap this in a bow very quickly, but what's been your biggest mindset shift in going to a new style of farming with renewables?
Well, the biggest shift is the consistency of the feed that's under the panels. There's just a consistent feed there basically all the time. So our stocking rates don't really vary. Nobody knows when the next drought's coming, and I'm positive when the next drought comes there will be massive reductions in stock numbers in there because feeding is not an option. Dust on panels is certainly not an option, so the feed's got to be managed to a point where we can maintain ground cover as much as we can. But I'm very confident that our stocking rates will remain higher in there than what they will outside the panels.
And just from a mindset shift for you personally?
Oh, mindset. Yeah, mindset. Well, it's a completely different space now. Yeah, like before when you're really scrambling and you've got to provide, you know that the buck stops with you. And we touched on before the different avenues. A few friends and I'm a little bit like your morning tea, but probably every 2 or 3 months in the drought, I don't play bowls, I don't play golf, but we did. We'd just go and have a day where we'd have a day of golf or a day. But the problem is that there's a lot of people don't do that. They tie themselves to the farm when they're in the drought. The ones that come out are the ones that are fine. The ones that they'll get through. It's the ones that don't come out. The ones that bury themselves with their stock and just stay at home. I'm riding this out. They don't engage. They don't go out to seek. At the Wellington show here a few years ago, they had a mental health checkup, wellbeing during the drought, which I thought was terrific. So I went in, I had my full checkup, everything was fine, and I got out and they had a few questions about my mental health, and then all they said was, look, we'd really, really like it if you just to address your weight a little bit, it'd be good. And I just said, it's really simple. I go to the pub on a Friday night and I have a few beers and I discuss my problems. So that's going to stay. So I said, if you want this to be clear, this stays. If this goes, I don't know what happens here. So it is just communication. But it's the people that don't come out, and I don't know how you reach them and how you get them to come to an event because they just see it as, no, I can't leave the farm. My stock are hungry. I've got to look after my stock. Stock come first. But it's a mentality that it gets a whole lot clearer if you get away from it for a day or 2 days, talk to someone else. Your decision making becomes a whole lot clearer, and you make better decisions.
Yeah. Can I just, Harry, because I think this is such a good thing to talk about, the diversification of the sale yard is going to open up opportunities for other services to come in. Can you just, run us through that and what you guys are looking at there?
Definitely. So following the last big drought, one of the key things for us was we needed to address the social value of sale yards, which is super important. Like, what better way for not-for-profits to access those people that you're talking about that don't necessarily come into town all that often, but they do come in to see their stock sold. So that's where it's a really good opportunity for those not-for-profits to catch the people when they're there to sell their stock. So people like Lifeline, Aussie Helpers, Beyond Blue, they're all not-for-profits that we're working with now. And so by the end of 2027, when we've got our new building, we'll actually have a spare room there for them to operate out of, especially in those tough times. And for us, it's a way to give back to the community as well. Like it is a money-making enterprise for council, so what better way for us to then use some of that money to give back?
Yeah, lovely. It's such a good initiative. So, Tony, thank you very much for sparking that thought bubble, because Harry and I talked about that earlier, and I was like, that is absolutely something that we need to get in. Final question, and I guess we're going to finish it a little bit how we started, but we're giving each of you a billboard, which means that your message needs to be clear and concise. What advice would you give to people about diversifying their business? Who wants to go first? Harry, look at that. He's thought about it.
No, it's more something that we were talking about before, but like this guy called Jim Collins, he's just an author, but he talks a lot about what you can be the best at, what you're passionate about, and then your economic drivers. And so for me, it's if you're passionate about something, then that makes it really easy, but then it's about being the best at it. So how can you, I think one of you was talking earlier about finding that total cost to produce, so reducing that cost and being the best at producing a good outcome, whatever that is, sheep, cattle, goat, cotton, wheat, whatever it is, but you're reducing your total spend. And being able to then use that as an economic driver. So to me, that's an easy start point, and I think you sort of touched on it as well with finding things like the desal plant where it doesn't change under any sort of modelling. So to me, that's the simple answer.
So can I push back on you here? You got a billboard. It's a fixed one. What's the few words you're saying?
What can you be the best at? What are you passionate about? And how can you make money out of it?
I like it. I can see that as we drive along the highway here back to Dubbo.
Little Venn diagram.
Yeah. I love it. Anthony.
So I got one. I've had a bit more time to think about it. Thanks, Harry. So, what is it? The worst plan is no plan. The best plan is one that works no matter what.
I like it. Jill?
I'm going to go back to complexity creates waste. So if you're going to diversify, you just need to do it in a pretty streamlined fashion so it doesn't create chaos amongst what you're already doing in the business.
Beautiful. Fiona?
And I'm going to use, instead of diversify, value add, because that's my area, but it looks different. It's not just about developing a brand. It can be as simple as putting in a silo and storing grain. It can be as simple as changing your enterprise on the farm. Like if you turn around and have some scrutiny on your own business and find something to suit. So, yeah, I would say on my billboard, value adding takes many different forms.
Cool. Thank you. Tony, final one.
Yeah, well, definitely. Well, for me, it's to diversify. Be conscious of what you diversify into. I do know of a bloke years ago, he diversified into farm machinery. What happens when it turns dry? You don't go and buy machinery. So it didn't end up so well. But you follow your passions. Your diversification, I find, will usually come with something that you're involved in, and once the pressure's on, you need to become more involved in it, and you'll work it out if it's not making money. So you'll go where it is, and you'll lean that way and push that way.
So can you summarise that for me in a couple of words for the billboard?
Diversify smartly.
I like it. Thank you to all of you for sharing your insights and experiences today. I think hugely valuable, and I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation tomorrow. But we do have a session with Tracy just after morning tea as well. So thank you so much for your insights and for taking the time to join us this morning.